Why, hello there. Welcome to Smart Aspirations with Justin Huff. Sit back, chill out, and go on a journey around the world. Around the world. Justin will discuss tales of hope, discovery, and general irreverence with some of the most dynamic personalities in the travel business. Remember, we do cool shit, and so can you.
Hey everybody, what's up, and welcome to another edition of Smart Aspirations with Justin Huff. This week, my guest is Sanjay Saxena, and he is one of the most old school, coolest, most pure, pioneering adventure travel enthusiasts on the planet. Sanjay is a legendary guide and has been all over the Himalayas, the Tibetan Plateau, Indian Tibet, Nepal, Bhutan, you name it, he's been there in this region. And you'll soon be able to tell he's such an unbelievable storyteller. And he's a new acquaintance of mine. I'll be honest, we don't go back for years at all. But when I first had a chat with him about what he wanted to talk on the show, I could immediately tell that this guy's the real deal. And he's seen some stuff, he's done some things, he set some records, and he definitely knows what he's doing. And not a lot of people are out there these days like that. I was like, Sanjay, what do you want to talk about on the show? The floor is yours. And Sanjay was like, listen, we did these two incredible experiences in Tibet. And it's very important to distinguish. When I say Tibet, I mean it's not only Chinese Tibet. I'm also talking about parts of Nepal, Indian Tibet in the northern Ladakh region there, Jammu Kashmir, all over there, and where these little pockets of Tibetan culture still exist, even in mainland China to this day. But back to the point being, he did this incredible first descent of the Indian portion of the Brahmaputra River in Indian Tibet, and as well as this epic overland adventure from Kunming in mainland China, all the way up to Lhasa, which is the capital of Chinese Tibet and the former residence of the current Dalai Lama. And this is, you can easily visit these parts of the world these days. When Sanjay first did these adventures, it wasn't so accessible, which is what makes these things so special. Nobody had ever done anything like this before. So before I hand it over to Sanjay and myself, I really hope you enjoy stories like this. I personally love this stuff. It's an honor and a privilege to hear from such a personality like Sanjay tell these stories. Again, Sanjay works with our ground handler, Nomadic Expeditions, for both Tibet and Mongolia. So if you'd like to plan a trip to this part of the world, we'll have the contact links at the end of the video. As always, if you've liked what you've heard and you want to hear more, please subscribe. We'd love to have you as a subscriber. Please just click the subscribe button or like the video, whatever you'd like to do. And yeah, it would mean the world to us. So we're going to keep featuring these incredible personalities like Sanjay, these incredible gems, these old travel souls. And if you're a lover of history, culture, things that have never been done before, things that you never knew existed or thought was possible, that's why we're here. So please, without further ado, here's Sanjay and myself. Have a great day. Hope you enjoy.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Smart Aspirations with Justin Huff. I'm thrilled today to have a new acquaintance of mine, but a fascinating individual. Sanjay Saxena joins us from his home. And where are you located, Sanjay, exactly?
New Jersey, Canterbury, and actually not home. I'm in our office.
You're in the office. So Sanjay works for Nomadic Expeditions, who's our ground handler, not just Mongolia, but Tibet as well. And Sanjay's, again, like I said, he's a new acquaintance of mine. And we were just shooting the breeze one day, and Sanjay was telling me about some of the most fascinating, like real hardcore exploratory adventures that he's done over his career as a guide, as an expedition leader, and just as somebody that works in tourism, adventure tourism. And I was like, listen, these are really, really cool. And not a lot of people are doing these anymore. So even pre-COVID. So Sanjay, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, because you have just an incredible history.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you, Justin, especially having seen some of the other podcasts or webcasts that you have done.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, love to share my experiences with you. So I grew up in India, and I was born in an army family. So my father was a career officer, and so he used to, get posted every couple of years to a different part of India. And so, we'd pack up our bags and move. In my, high schooling years, I went through eight different schools.
Oh my
Not because I was kicked out, but because we moved.
Lots of friends.
Yeah, exactly. So, like my sisters, they really didn't like it. It's like, oh, we have to make new friends. We have to pack. And to me, it was almost, oh, wow, new trees to climb, new friends to make, new mountains to see. So it was, just that kind of perspective was always there. And then thanks to my dad, I ended up going to some of the remotest parts of the country. Because,
awesome.
India has a huge landmass that is basically an active border, with entire Pakistan, China, and China. And in that border area, civilians are not allowed. Within like maybe some places it's 50 miles, some places it's 100 miles, unless a military person is posted in that region. And once a year, they're allowed to bring their families because, they allow families to get together. And so, my dad would say, summer vacations, hey, come on over. And so I would be up in, Ladakh and Kashmir and Nagaland.
What
so all
a
of
place
these
to
areas
explore.
to explore as a kid. And so I got to see a lot of that.
Wow.
And then when I was in high school, there's a very famous Indian mountaineer called Colonel Kumar, Bull Kumar, who actually led the Indian expedition to Everest, was also the first Indian expedition to Kanchenjunga.
Okay.
Yeah. So he had kind of was starting a kind of an adventure travel business in the sense of letting foreigners come and take them into the Indian Himalaya. Sure. And so he looked at me and said, hey, you want to come guide? I'll teach you.
Oh, cool.
Sure. I mean,
Absolutely,
I would love to do that. And so that's how I got my break into guiding. And at that time, primarily from Mountain Travel USA, all the groups that were coming in had to be guided through the Indian Himalaya. And then I was the guide on a majority of those trips.
You were the lucky trip leader.
Yeah, I was the local trip leader because there was always a mountain travel guide that came along, and so we did a lot of explorations all across, especially up in Ladakh, which is it's basically the western edge of the Tibetan plateau.
Yeah, right there.
So it really is Tibetan, except that it happens to fall under Indian political system. And so
Indian Tibet is what we typically call it in the travel business.
Yeah, exactly. But it's totally secular, so it's not been affected by any government rulings, and it was closed for the longest time until the late 70s when tourists were allowed in there. So I got to go in and pioneer a lot of the early trekking routes in there. Awesome. Yeah, and the same thing happened in all of Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, which off for the average traveler. And there again, thanks to the military connection, I got in there in the 80s.
That's incredible.
Way before anybody else was going in.
Yeah, so these remote frontiers and exploring with special access and government permission, that's been hardwired from you basically since birth. So I can completely understand, when your heart just jumps into joy when you're seeing these new routes and learning about explorations and, all these old, incredible, famous explorers that you've followed in the footsteps of, literally.
Right. Yeah. And I was always an avid reader. In fact, my high school library teacher, the librarian told me I got the award for the most books signed out.
A true nerd. I can sympathize with that completely.
But I was really into all these early explorations because what caught my eye was a book which was called Blank on a Map. And it was
Okay.
talking about this whole Central Asia area because, parts of China, India, all of these were kind of mapped, but there was this
Sure.
whole area in Tibet and in, Central Asia there was nothing on it.
The great unknown.
Yeah. And so I started reading about that and, came across Joseph Rock's writing,
Okay.
as well as Kingdon-Ward's writing.
Joseph Kingdon-Ward.
Yeah. So Rock was really amazing character as far as I was concerned because he was totally unschooled. He never went to school because he had to leave home when he was 16 or 17 years old. His dad wanted him to be a minister, and he said,
to hell with it, literally.
And so he trapezed around Europe for a while. He was Austrian,
Okay.
walked around Europe for a while, and then somehow ended up in Hawaii.
Wow.
Where, yeah,
Quite a
and,
traverse.
exactly. And where he started working with and found his calling, which was botany. And apparently he wrote such great papers on the flora of Hawaii that he was hired by the U.S. Department of Agriculture to find this tree that they knew about, the seed of a tree, which would help cure leprosy. And so he was hired to go into Asia and to find this tree and bring back the seeds, which he did.
Yeah.
And apparently that's where some of the cures for leprosy come out from.
Oh my gosh.
And that kind of established him. And, he continued to do work, and he got funding then from the Smithsonian, from National Geographic to go back into Asia and start, really doing some research work. And this is all the fact that he didn't even complete high school. He was totally self-taught. But, his drawings, his way of writing, so detailed, so well done that, everybody just accepted him as, like really great research work.
Sure.
And so he went into China at that time in what we call Yunnan today, did a lot of exploration, writing, and he became very fascinated with local culture. So while he was doing less work of botany, he was also doing a lot of stuff with the cultural heritage, and his writings were then published extensively by National Geographic.
Okay.
And those magazines was what I got. And so I got to read about him traveling in this area. And simultaneously, in a slightly different part of Tibet, was Joseph Kingdon-Ward, but he was from the National Geographic Society from England.
Yeah.
And he was out there trying to trace some of these rivers.
Yeah.
And coming along, trying to figure out what is what, because, there was a lot of knowledge that there was this crazy river in Tibet, which was called the Sangpo. And nobody knew where it went. They just knew that there was this legendary river. And then in the southern side of the Himalaya, you have the Brahmaputra River, which is this immense river that comes out from the east in Assam, flows into what is today Bangladesh, joins the Ganga River to form the Gangetic Delta Basin.
Down in West Bengal.
And then there is the Irrawaddy River that comes in, the Mekong, the Salaween, all of them descend into Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
And so the presumption was that one of these rivers is probably the downward drainage for the Sangpo in Tibet. But nobody really knew what it was. And so Kingdon-Ward was trapezing around Tibet trying to find, but those river gorges were so deep, they were captured, those guys, if you read their bios, their biographies, they were true adventurers.
Right.
They were really going into with almost nothing.
Yeah.
And spending so much time, effort, with no maps, completely lost, and finding them, and then coming out and giving us all these crazy,
gifts,
beautiful pieces of writing. And so just thinking of, reading all of that was what got me really interested in that part of the world.
And how old were you when you first discovered these writings?
I don't know, 15, 16.
Oh, okay. So definitely young. And
very young. And then, and at that time I was also reading a lot of stuff with mountain climbing. So we had gotten things with, from Mallory's writing, the works. And then of course, knowing people like Colonel Bull Kumar, who was a climber. So all of those inspirations kind of said, to the mountains you go, lad. And so that's where I went. And then as and when I started getting opportunities to go deeper in and cross borders, I just took every one of those opportunities.
Oh, absolutely. You've got to.
Yeah.
Mallory, that's the guy that I'm not an expert with Everest exploration, but Mallory was the guy that went up and he didn't make it, right?
That is correct.
Before Sir Edmund Hillary.
Very much so. Yeah. Literally by years and years, because Mallory and Irving were up there in the 20s. And at that time, Nepal was closed. Okay. So you could not enter Everest or could not reach Everest from Nepal. You had to go there from Tibet. Yeah. Okay. So they actually did the same kind of routing that I had was talking about, going in from India to the eastern edge of the Himalayas, like from Sikkim going into Tibet, and then coming down along the Sangpo River for part of the journey till you come to the northern face of Tibet. Of Everest. And so Mallory and Irvin were climbing on the north face when they disappeared.
Got it. Yeah, and people, I believe that nobody's found one of, I can't remember.
Irvin was the body that they
found.
Speculate that they found. Yeah.
And they still haven't found Mallory's body. It remains like a huge mystery. So oh, good luck with that.
Yeah, I know. It's another fantastic story.
Sure, it really is. And speaking of fantastic stories, you did the first. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to try to word this correctly. You were on the first descent of the Brahmaputra River in India, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that? Because that looks like such a cool story.
Yeah, absolutely, I will. And, river rafting was never something that I pursued. Because I was always into the mountains, into climbing, into trekking, your feet firmly planted on the ground.
Forget the water stuff.
Yeah. So the water stuff was for the fishes as far as I was concerned. And, I did know some rafters and, hats off to them. I like my feet on solid ground. So I was actually in Cambridge at that time, Cambridge, Massachusetts, when a good friend of mine, David Brashears, came by and said, hey, let's have lunch. I said, sure. Usually when he says something like, let's have lunch, I thought we we're going to be talking about some expeditions because he wants to go into India, needed permits. And so I would help him, organize it. But he pulls out this map and he says, hey, you know about this Brahmaputra River? And I said, river? Yeah, of course. Everybody knows about the Brahmaputra in India because Brahmaputra means the son of Lord Brahma.
Oh, right.
So it is the only male river in the world, actually. And I'll tell you another story about this. But why the Brahmaputra is called the Brahmaputra later on.
Yes, please. Wait. Can I interrupt you? I meant to ask you this earlier. Sorry. Okay, to get into full character, where's your expedition hat?
Oh, yeah, it's right here. Hold on.
Don't forget that. Yes. You're getting the full guide mode. Now we're good. All right, go.
So David says, I'm thinking that maybe we should go raft this river.
Yeah.
And I kind of looking at him, I said, are you sure you don't want to go climb Namche Barwa, which is the mountain that this river goes around, instead of rafting the river? And he says, yeah, but I think we should do this for Kinto. And that just kind of my bulb in my head exploded.
Totally.
Now that's motivation to do a river rafting trip, something that I normally don't do. Just so that our viewers know what I'm talking about, the Indian Survey developed a team that they referred to as the Pundits. So these were, again, local men, Indian men from the mountains, because nobody could go into the Tibet area in terms of, the Britishers or the foreigners.
Sure.
They trained the Indians to go in. And these guys, they would disguise themselves as pilgrims. Therefore, that is why they were called Pundits, as their nickname. But they were incredible. They would have their prayer wheels.
Yeah.
And in the prayer wheels, they would make their notes because, the prayer wheels have paper.
Yeah, they've got the paper wrapped around it in a circle.
Yeah. And that is where they would write all their notes in detail.
That is awesome.
Yeah, and they were taught to walk with such a measured step that they would use their beads as they are measuring their steps and then tally. So that their accuracy in terms of the mileage, the ascents, descents, incredibly accurate.
Right on point.
Very accurate. And so these pundits would go in. And at that time, again, to go back to the source of the rivers, people knew that there was the Sangpo and where did it come out. And so the Survey of India came up with this ingenious plan of cutting logs, marking the logs and dropping them at 50 logs a day or 10 logs a day on the river for a period of about 50 days, and then have spotters and on the southern side of the Himalayas waiting for these logs to come out. And so whether it was the Brahmaputra, the Mekong, they would know, hey, the Sangpo is the headwater.
Yeah.
And so for that, a pundit whose name was Nyan Singh was hired. He says, okay, you're going to go and your job is to enter Tibet, then follow the Sangpo till it gets into these mountains, cut these logs, drop them just after the monsoon is over so that the water level will be lower, and we will spot it over here. And so Nyan Singh said, sure, I'll do this, but I can't go alone. I need an assistant. And so then they took Kintup as his assistant.
Right.
And so the two of them went. But now this Nyan Singh guy had connections in China, and he turned out to be a little more dishonest than was thought.
Okay.
So he pocketed all the funds that were given, and then he gave Kintup up to the local Tibetan warlord as a spy.
Okay.
And said, hey, and so he got, some money for that, and he abandoned the project and he disappeared.
Jeez.
So Kintup was put into imprisonment. And at that time, he was still a devout Buddhist, and he managed to just about escape from his imprisonment. And he escaped towards a monastery, but his captors did catch up with him. But the head monk of the monastery, Kintup appealed to him, and the head monk says, okay, I will keep you under my vigilance. Talk to the government, the local warlord. They left him, but he was then enslaved because the monk had to pay those people off and said that, okay, Kintup is going to be my slave.
Right.
And so he was enslaved. He worked really hard, and every now and then he would get a break. He would go out and he would cut his logs and keep them in place. And he did that, and he was basically enslaved for about 2.5 years.
Oh my gosh.
Then the monk was so thrilled with how devoted this guy has been, how hardworking, said, hey, you're free. I believe your story. You're free to go. So Kintup then went, and so good was his dedication. He went and he floated after the monsoon the logs. But of course, this
still,
is
2 years after.
But it was almost 3 years later with the third
with
summer.
The captivity and everything.
Right, yeah. And of course, on the other end, everybody had gone. So there was nobody there. So Kintup did this and then decided, well, you know what? Maybe I'll follow the logs. Let me go downstream instead of going back home the easy way. So he went downstream, started following the logs, and he came all the way past the Big Bend, making notes everywhere. including this about 120-meter waterfall on the river on the far side of Namche Barwa. Great details. Came down to Arunachal Pradesh area, and he encountered the tribals there.
Mm-hmm.
These were the tribals that were partially headhunters, and they are the ones that had kept the British at bay from the southern side. Because, the traditional way to find a source of a river is you go up the river.
Yeah, of course.
So when the British forces or the British survey team tried to go up the river, they encountered these really fierce tribals in the mountains.
Mm-hmm. And this is in all Northeast India.
Northeast India, exactly. And they feared for their lives, and they left.
Mm-hmm.
And so they could never, ever go in. So Kintup came all the way down there to India, and then he feared for his life.
Yeah.
So he turned around and went all the way back into Tibet. And then down around the other side, and then eventually came back to, Sikkim and Darjeeling, and then presented his findings. And he had written a detailed log of his entire thing.
Yeah.
And when he came back, the survey people at that time just poo-pooed him. He says, look, for one thing, you were an assistant. You didn't know anything. Sure. This is all just made up work. You've come home after 4 years, go away. So he was basically shamed and cast away. So he went back to his home in Sikkim, Darjeeling, where he continued to work as a tailor.
Okay. Quite a different change in profession.
Exactly. many years later, Sven Hedin from, also sponsored by National Geographic, is going along the river, making notes, and other explorers came, they made notes, which were then sent back. Mm-hmm. Somehow, Kintup's notes were not actually discarded. They were in the survey's archives.
Oh, okay.
And when, and this is not until I think the 1940s was when somebody actually compared them and realized that what Kintup wrote back in 1890 is accurate.
Yeah.
And it totally validated his story. Yeah. And at that time, he was vindicated because he was given an award, and they gave him a salary, which had been not given to him at that time.
How old was he, more or less, at the time?
Yeah, he died in, I believe, 53 was, I think.
Okay. So he lived quite a life.
I forget. Yeah. He lived quite a long life, but at the very last minute, literally, he died, I think, maybe 2 years or 3 years after he was accepted and named a Pundit and given the credit for having done all of this.
Well, at least it happened during his lifetime. I mean, that had to be
exactly. And so knowing that story, and then the idea was, how do we do this? So we came up with this thought that, once we get the permits, first of all, we had to get the permits.
Sure.
And then if we got the permits, when we get to the furthest point where we can start our rafting trip, we would carve a log. Much like Kintup did, but we were going to carve like in memory of Kintup, float the log, as soon as we float the log, we will launch our rafts and then follow the log way out.
That is incredible.
So that is what really got me saying, yes, David, I think I will put on a life jacket and a wetsuit and go rafting with you.
That is magical. Rafting
and it was a fabulous trip. It was actually filmed by BBC, and then it was also broadcast in the US under a series called Classic Adventures.
Okay.
But this was done by A&E, but it was like in 1992, I think.
Early 90s.
I doubt if anybody even has a copy of that.
Well, I was going to say, how can we plug that?
No, but maybe what we can do is we can show an excerpt of it. So,
sure. Yeah, of course. But I just wish, it's so funny because there's so many, as the quote unquote Thomas Friedman, the world is flat. Not literally. It's just, there are so few of these expeditions and frontiers left. And for old souls that love that pioneering experience, it's really difficult to, to find something like that that's still left to explore. And you're so fortunate to have undertaken an expedition like that and just kind of carve your name in history, not just Kintup's, but that's just absolutely incredible.
Yeah, no, we were very lucky because at that time, again, having the connections in the Indian Army, which controls the border, and having enough connections really helped that we could get permits. And at that time, again, we brought in my old mentor, Colonel Kumar, who helped get the permits and get the expeditions organized. And also what was really great was the fact that his son, Akshay, who was also a good friend, was also a really good rafting guide. In fact, he had come to the US, trained to be a rafting guide, and he was starting rafting the various rivers in India.
Sure.
And so, I also teamed up with him and said, all right, since we have to have rafts and we have to have rafting guides, and I'm a nobody as far as rafting guide is concerned, and David is also a nobody, we are going to be basically doing what you tell us as soon as we get on the river.
Yeah.
And so Akshay came with us, and he kind of guided the rafting through all these really phenomenal rapids that we encountered. And I mean, there were some days when the canyons were so steep that, there was no way of having land support. There were times when we could get land support that, every 2 or 3 days, the river would come close enough where we could hike and get supplies. And then there were these canyon days where there was absolutely nothing.
And you're just floating.
And we are just floating. And we did this in winter, in December, January, because that's it's cold, yes. But the important thing is that it's low water. Because in India, the monsoon is huge. And and then the snow melt is huge.
Right.
And so we are going in this canyon, and then you could see the water mark about 40, 50 feet above us.
Oh my God.
and I would say, shoot, that's the monsoon level mark. And you could literally see it. There is no shrubs that are, everything has been washed away at this height. And we're at the river and we are looking way up there. And it's like scary as hell when you can just visualize this wall, and then suddenly this water that high, and the speed that it would be going through.
Oh my God. Power of water is insane.
It was insane. And Akshay, as you can see in these images, of the rafting, I have to kind of just take a moment to say that Akshay, my good friend Akshay, sad news, but he passed away last week. And
so sorry to hear that.
thank you. It was very, very unexpected. All of us were in shock, and in a way, I'm great that this webcast came about at this time. I was able to talk about this trip because it was one of his first biggest adventures. It was my first big river adventure, and this is, I guess, in a way, a really nice tribute. To Akshay and everything that he has done in the pioneering world of rafting in India.
And shout out to Akshay, his family, and all of his contributions on everything he does. Rest in peace, man. Sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
Sorry for your loss.
I know, but I guess that's a circle of life.
Circle of life. That's how it is, and he definitely lived a life worth living for sure.
Yes, absolutely.
Coming from, taking things from the water back to the land where you're most comfortable with. You mentioned 2 explorers before, Joseph Rock and Kingdon-Ward, Joseph Kingdon-Ward. Those were big, huge inspirations for you. And I know that you led this incredible trip from Yunnan to Tibet. Can you tell us a little bit about that, the Overland Journey?
Yeah. So again, I was incredibly lucky. Managed to get to Tibet in 1986 on my first trip, and subsequently many times. But even at that time, there were certain parts of Tibet that were never really open. And so we could fly into an airport called Gunkur, which is about an hour and a half.
That's still
from
the same
Lhasa.
one that they're using in Lhasa, right?
Correct. Yeah. So it's kind of called Lhasa Airport because that's the only airport that services.
Right. It's like an hour outside of Lhasa.
That is correct. Yeah. Exactly. Along the
Brahmaputra
River.
Sampo.
Yeah. Sangpo. So Sangpo, by the way, in Tibetan just means river.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And so it's kind of funny when we say Sangpo River, it's like saying river. And again, it has to do with translation,
Right.
When the Westerners, because say in Tibetan as well as in certain parts of the world, you don't necessarily have to have a name for every river, for every peak, or it's just part of nature. And so when the first Westerners came and they saw this big river, they asked the local people, "Hey, what's the name?" And they just said, "The river."
Yeah.
And for them, the river is Sangpo.
Sampo.
And when they look at one of these small mountain streams coming in, and they would say, "What is this?" And they'd say, "It's Kichu," or "It's Chu," meaning small river.
Chu. Yeah.
Yeah. So Chu is usually a stream.
Yeah.
And Sangpo is a river.
Okay.
So and when you're going past, say, the Yarlung Valley, where the airport is, the river is called Yarlung Sampo.
Okay.
And then as you go towards the Big Bend, the Labrung Sangpo, the Punchuk Sangpo, they join the river.
Had no idea.
Yeah. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah, it is. It's funny how things get lost in translation over time.
Yes,
it's hysterical.
Yes. So anyway, I got sidetracked.
No, it's good. No, we appreciate it. We appreciate it.
So to go back to Kingdon-Ward, trying to pierce together these different river gorges, but never being able to do it. And then Joseph Rock, who was doing all these phenomenal writings. And another person that read his writings during the 20s was James Hilton.
Yes.
And James Hilton's
very famous
book, Lost Horizon, where he talks about Shangri-La. He invented the word Shangri-La.
The first guy to say the word Shangri-La.
Which he came about was based upon the writings of Joseph Rock and Kingdon-Ward. He had never traveled.
Never been there.
Yeah. So he just said, they take off from a plane in Peshawar, which is in Pakistan. They fly up to the Tibetan plateau. The plane crashes, and they find themselves in this beautiful, gorgeous place called Shangri-La. And so we said, all right, we've got to find, or at least drive through this area to see what the Shangri-La is. And incidentally, now just north of where Joseph Rock lived, there's a Tibetan town called Gyalthang, which has now been renamed Shangri-La.
Oh, is that it's north of Lijiang? Is that what I'm thinking?
Yeah. It is well north of Lijiang. So from Lijiang, you go up. The first town you stop is Dechen, and then you continue on, and you will come to Gyalthang, and beautiful green, lush areas. Again, I'll show you imagery of that area.
Yeah, we'll put them up.
Yeah, and that is now officially the Chinese renamed it Shangri-La in honor of the writings by
original
James
work to put it on the map, so to speak.
Yeah. And so I got this permit in 2000 to do a drive and be able to traverse, which part of this was a military road. And so we flew into Lijiang and got into our vehicles and started driving up. So we actually landed in Kunming. And our original plan was to start driving at Kunming, but the drive from Kunming to Lijiang was just taking too much time. Okay. So we and also it was not as interesting. So we just flew to Lijiang, spent some time in Lijiang. So Lijiang was where Joseph Rock's house is. Just north of the city, there's a small village. That's where he lived for many, many years and did all his work. In fact, another fun story about Joseph Rock was that he was actually hired by the U.S. military, the Defense Department, to try and establish a runway for the Air Force to fly over the hump.
Okay.
During the war, when the Japanese had started invading, so the idea was that from India, they would fly over the mountains into China in order to supply the soldiers.
Okay.
And it was Joseph Rock who kind of did the pioneering work on where would be the best airfield in order for these
to land and serve
for the big cargo planes to come in, and he established it with his local connections.
Oh my gosh!
So flying the hump, which is from Northeast India, basically in Assam, was where the airfields were, and then from there they would fly over the hump into China.
Okay. Could you describe briefly just what exactly the hump is for people to know?
Well, okay. The hump is the Himalaya.
Okay.
The Himalaya was just so big, you couldn't really, traverse it. They couldn't get supplies or anything going. Right. And so it was nicknamed the hump because they were literally taking off at about 4,000 feet, going up to 28,000 feet, and immediately coming down to 4,000 feet to land.
Right.
And so that's this little loop that they were doing, the U.S. Air Force and the British Air Force. So it was Royal Air Force and the U.S. Air Force together that flew the hump during the war, and to provide supplies on the other side.
Okay, got you.
So it was phenomenal.
And it's pronounced Himalaya, not Himalaya, correct?
Correct. It's Himalaya.
Himalaya.
Yeah. Yes. Himalaya. It's actually two words. Himalaya.
Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So that basically means abode of the gods.
Okay.
Is the Sanskrit translation.
What is it? Abode of the gods?
Yeah, the home.
Oh,
A-B-O-D?
the home.
Yeah.
Abode. Okay.
Abode. Yeah, my pronunciation is not
No. It's the audio. No, your pronunciation is perfect. It's all me. It's on me. It's on me. You're golden. So abode of the gods.
Yeah.
Okay.
And another minor sidetrack.
Sure.
The house that I'm currently living in New Jersey belonged to one of the U.S. pilots who flew the hump.
No kidding.
It was.
Was that on purpose?
No, it was. It was totally a coincidence. I didn't even know about it until I had bid for the house.
Right.
I had made the offer for the house.
Yeah.
And then somebody told me that they were checking the history on Facebook. One of my nephews, and he says, "Hey, it says that Colonel Meade was in the Air Force and in India flying out of Assam." And then I tracked it down, and he flew the hump.
That is insane. Incredible. Wow. It's not just a small world, but the little synchronicities here and there that you find during your life.
Yeah, exactly. So
I don't think that's a coincidence, Sanjay. I don't think it's a coincidence.
Maybe I was meant to be in that house, but I really enjoy living there. So
good. You're making him proud. But anyway, so continue. Back to the expedition. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So we came into Lijiang, and then from Lijiang, of course, I had to go see where Joseph Rock lived.
Sure.
For the many years that he spent his time there. So we spent a day, just hanging out in the village, doing things, and then started the drive.
Yeah. And
so we then drove from there to Dechen, and then from Dechen coming on to Gyalthang, which is now called Shangri-La. And then, of course, we did, Gyalthang has the Sumsoling Monastery, beautiful,
gorgeous
monastery.
We'll throw a picture up for sure.
It's a really beautiful, large monastery. And then continued on. And that's when the adventure started, because we first encounter, of course, the Yangtze River. Straight out of Lijiang, you hit the Yangtze River.
It's right there.
It's right there. So there are two major spots just outside Lijiang. One is, of course, the Tiger Leaping Gorge.
Gorge. Yeah.
Which is, again, kind of similar to the Big Bend, but not as big or not as long. But it is, again, it could have been just one major waterfall, but it is not. It is a place where the river just descends hundreds of feet very fast.
Yeah.
So it's incredible to see.
And
then soon after the Tiger Leaping Gorge is what is referred to as the big U-turn that the Yangtze River makes. So the Yangtze River has been flowing south, and it does a number of turns. And at this point, it makes this very dramatic turn and starts flowing totally northeast.
Okay.
And then it's going northeast, just as the Brahmaputra, which was flowing east, makes a complete turn and starts flowing southwest.
Yeah.
The Yangtze does the opposite. And so then the Yangtze flows all the way out into, Shanghai.
Yeah.
And does not drain into Southeast Asia. Which
it would be interesting to see if, what would happen to Chinese history if the river didn't turn that way.
Correct. Exactly. I mean, it's fantastic speculation, but I guess, whatever.
It is what it is.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
So that was the first two big things that we encountered. And then going up along the Yangtze, I was actually surprised because I saw yet another fantastic U-turn. So in a way, the Yangtze made like two hairpin turns within, I would say, 100 miles of itself. Yeah, and both were really phenomenally sharp turns. So it's really amazing. Those mountains where it turned around must be like really solid bedrock.
Right. We'll have to put up a picture and kind of a map too that shows like how sharp they are and how quick they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And then as we go through there, again, sheer valleys, canyons, these roads are definitely not for the faint of heart, because
take your motion sick pills before.
Yeah. Well, not just that, you've got to
the steep
also be a little bit calm because there are times when the road could be at a slight angle and then it just falls, like 2,000 feet into the river. And so, your Jeeps are going at a slow pace, literally crawling. There were a couple of times when, the driver says, everybody get off and walk, and I'm going to come along. And we were like, man, he's taking care of us, but what happens if he slips? If
he's gone, yeah.
So, and we put those pictures up also to just show the cliff sides, and it's like just scree. It really looks like just a scree, as if you're going off on a glacier and you're just walking. Except it's, whatever, 8 feet wide, and this Toyota Land Cruiser, man, those vehicles are great. Just sort of inching its way through, and then we'll get down to the river, and then we'll kind of drive along till there is some kind of a bridge and cross over. And just looking at the volume of water, the intensity, and thinking, whatever it is, 100 years ago, there were no bloody bridges there.
Nothing. Yeah.
So how the hell was Joseph Rock crossing these things? And Kingdon-Ward. I mean, no wonder they could never really go this journey that they talked about wanting to do. And I could see that, it was only later on with modern engineering that these bridges came up and one could actually cross.
Get to the other side.
But otherwise, you'd have to go upstream to a point where the river is so small that you can cross over and then come all the way down.
All the way back, yeah.
Yeah, so the journeys would, take weeks and weeks.
Yeah, man.
And so then we come along to... passing the Salaween Canyon and then the Mekong Canyon. And then we come up to this river, which I thought is really big, and I couldn't figure out what it was because I said, it's not on my map. I have no idea what the hell it is. So I'm talking to the locals, and, we had a Tibetan interpreter, and he spoke to people. And we said, it's called the Labrung. And it's basically just a local river, and it flows into the Brahmaputra. So it was never really given its own credit, but it's a major tributary.
Okay.
It's a significant tributary, and we got to drive along that for a little bit. And again, I think we have pictures of that we can throw up too.
Yes.
Till we come to a point where it is starting to make the curve to do the big bend around Namche Barwa, and our permits did not allow us to go beyond that. In any case, our permits was to do the overland in vehicles and not trekking.
Yeah. Okay.
Because that was the end of the road. So you had to then switch to hiking and basically cross the river by boat, get onto the other side, and then hike.
Keep going.
So I have mentioned this mountain, Namche Barwa.
Mhm.
Namche Barwa is the highest unclimbed Himalayan peak today, and it is
Really?
on the eastern edge of the Himalayas.
Okay.
And the Brahmaputra River snakes itself around it. It
Okay.
completely curves around the mountain.
Mhm.
So the mountain is, huge, 25,000 some feet. And then from there all the way down to the river basin is just one straight,
Okay.
canyon.
Okay.
So it's an absolutely immensely fantastic canyon, as and
sight.
when somebody will be able to go and see the entire thing. This is actually a fun exercise. Even if you Google trying to get satellite imagery of the gorge, of the Sangpo Gorge or the Brahmaputra Gorge around the Big Bend, there is very little that is available. You'll see
that's incredible. So, I mean, not even Google Earth or any of these incredibly technologically advanced companies can get imaging from this part of the world.
Well, because you can't get in on a land level, and then there is some imagery from which is called the satellite mapping.
Yeah.
But that is accurate up to a certain point, because you also have to, I guess, because of all the foliage, the cliffs, whatever.
Right.
There is nothing that is really clean that I have seen to date.
Unexplored frontier. Unexplored frontier.
It is that, definitely. Yeah.
Love that.
And at that point, at the Big Bend, was where we meet the Sangpo River, and then drove along the Sangpo all the way until we come to Sedang, and close to where there is a bridge you cross over, and then drive along the Kichu into Lhasa.
And Sedang, that is that's from what I've only been to Lhasa, and I remember hearing our guides talking about Sedang and its importance.
Sedang is an important town on the Yarlung Valley. So just like Gunkar Airport, you drive about an hour and a half northwest to get to Lhasa. If you drive east, downstream from on the river, you will come to Sedang.
Okay.
So Sedang is where the Yarlung Valley kind of opens up. And you also see Samye Monastery, which is near Sedang, as well as the Yobu Lakhang, which is credited to be the oldest building in Tibet. I'm sure you've seen pictures. I will throw a picture of that.
We'll put it up.
Beautiful, beautiful picture. So that is Sedang. So come in there and then eventually reach Lhasa.
Okay.
At that
point. And so, I mean, did you consider that journey complete once you got to Lhasa, or was it more or less complete before that? I mean, knowing.
No. I think Lhasa was, to me, only not 100% complete, because the original travelers would go from Lhasa. They were going further down, going into Shigatse, then into Gyantse.
Gyantse in Western Tibet.
Yeah. So we did all of that also.
Okay, cool. Cool. So that would have been crazy.
And then the year before, I had already done going from Lhasa. Actually, sorry, not a year before. This is 1986, so it's 16 years before.
Right.
I've already done the Lhasa to Kathmandu drive.
Okay, cool.
And so basically, all the way from Lijiang, I've driven down to Kathmandu.
That's awesome. Wow.
So it's pretty cool.
Now,
but that drive was, the landscape, the terrain was really phenomenal. And today also, up to a certain point, one can go. I am told, and I haven't been there in the last couple of years, that there is a section of that road near where the Big Bend starts that is now not being permitted for travelers. So you can go to a great part of it. But not in its entirety, as I understand it.
And on a related note, if viewers and listeners are really inspired by this and they want to go and visit these parts of the world, it can be done. But it's important to understand, and from what I've seen with my own eyes, and from what you know already, there's not, outside of Lhasa, outside of Lijiang, outside of, I guess, proper Shangri-La, there are not a lot of proper, I would dare to say, luxury accommodations. And
there is absolutely no luxury accommodation. But that doesn't mean you cannot create your traveling camp as a nice, comfortable camp.
You've got your own kit.
Yeah. So that is really the way to do it.
Yeah.
Because the countryside is again beautiful. There are these beautiful river sides. There are meadows, and you can set up your camp. And what we did was I really wanted to explore the area. The idea was not just to make a beeline and make a dash.
Sure.
So some days we would drive only 2-3 hours because we came to this canyon, which was just gorgeous. We said, hey, let's set up camp and let's go for a walk and go explore the canyon. We saw so many fantastic blue poppies, the Himalayan blue poppies. All over the area. And it's indigenous to that area. The blue poppy doesn't grow in other places. The color is literally like a sky blue poppy. Beautiful. And we'd see fields of them up there. And so depending upon, of course, how much time people have. So we would plot the journey so as to make certain breaks, but we would have to take a camp along.
Sure.
And so the camping would be done, and then we bring in our own cooks and things.
Sure.
So a journey like this is not something that you do on a spur of the moment.
Yeah.
Because we have to get permits and things, we have to get, everybody has to, we get a Chinese visa in order to enter China, and then to travel in TAR, Tibetan Autonomous Region.
You need a Tibet permit.
You have to get a permit for traveling in that region. And so we have to apply for that. We get the permits, and then all the camping permits, etc. And then we start the journey. So it does require a little bit of planning.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, what we're hoping
absolutely
to do
doable.
Yeah, it's absolutely doable, and I think that with your own kit, it makes it really, really comfortable. And I'm assuming that the roads have improved quite a bit since then.
Maybe.
Let's find out.
Yeah. But I'll tell you something about the Himalayas. I mean, and this is true not just in part of the Himalaya that is in China, in Tibet, whether it's Arunachal Pradesh or in Ladakh, even in Nepal and Bhutan, everywhere you go. I mean, those mountains are very, very alive. There are definitely movements happening. They are still growing. The monsoons play havoc every year.
Okay.
So every year there are landslides. There is no two ways about the fact that some part of the road is washed out. How soon it is put back is another case.
Sure.
So I would speculate that you will encounter times when that the road is not what we would like it to be, like something here in, say, the Sierras or the Rockies, where the ground is so much more stable, and there is no monsoon to deal with. I mean, the monsoon rains are intense.
And I don't think that people realize that it's not just, I think when people think the monsoons, they just think that it affects like India and Sri Lanka. No, this is all over the subcontinent. This is all over the Himalayas.
And the Himalaya is basically the wall that stops the monsoon, which is why Tibet is considered a high altitude desert.
Yes.
Yeah, because the monsoon does not get into the Tibetan side.
Right.
But a lot of our driving is actually on the southern side of the mountains as we are going through the mountains to get to the Tibetan plateau.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So once you reach the Tibetan plateau, we are on the rain shadow side of the Himalaya.
And there you go. There's your desert.
And that's how you come into the desert. Yeah.
Okay.
But the monsoons, and the Himalayas, the southern part of the Himalaya get a heck of a lot of rain because as the monsoon clouds come in, they keep building up they hit this wall and they keep building up.
Right.
The clouds usually are whatever, 10, 12, 13, 14,000 feet. But then they keep building up. And as they're getting up to 20, 25, 26,000 feet, they just drop everything. And only the clouds go over and, some rain goes over, but it's minimal. But everything is dropped in the southern part of the Himalaya. And that is why, like if you go to Sikkim, or actually when you see the footage of the Brahmaputra River, when we're starting off, there's like banana trees. and literally, a couple of days later, it's above the tree line because of the altitude, and you're now on the Tibetan the rain shadow side of the mountain, so there's no rain. But on the southern side, it's like a tropical jungle.
Oh, it's crazy because I was in, you've been to Bhutan, I'm assuming, right?
Of course, yeah.
Of course. So you're in like Thimphu, for example, and then you drive to Punakha. Punakha's got banana trees everywhere, and it's hot.
Yeah. You know? Punakha is 4,000 feet, and Thimphu is 7.5.
It's unbelievable how it changes like that. So it's not just this, complete, it's not like these iconic high altitude Himalayan mountains everywhere. It's a bit more green, diverse, and because warm.
The one thing that we don't try to, or we don't always equate or remember, is that, like say Bhutan, for instance, or Nepal, they are about the same altitude as Florida.
Oh my God.
Think of it that way.
I'm looking at my map. The people can't see it, but I'm like pointing my map. I'm like looking at Orlando. There's Thimphu.
And because once I tell that to people, they said, oh yeah, of course, it has to be warm.
Right.
Why would it not be warm? And the only reason that it is cold is because of the elevation. So as you start climbing higher, so even at the latitude of, if Orlando was at 10,000 feet, it'd be cold.
That's insane. That's totally. But that's where I'm from. Not Orlando, but Florida. Yeah.
Okay.
Unbelievable. Yeah, I got you. Wow. I never really made the connection, especially with the Himalayas being the wall that stops the monsoon from going, and then
correct
Tibetan plateau. I knew it was a desert, but this is like, okay, now that makes sense. It's totally the rain shadow. Okay.
I mean, the Himalayas do a big number on all the lands above, because the Taklamakan Desert, the Gobi, Mongolia, all of them get almost no rain from the south because of the Himalaya. The Himalaya stopped everything. Otherwise, the rains could have gone much further up. You get a cyclone coming up the Bay of Bengal, it would have gone, way into Central Asia, but it never does. Because
stop.
The Himalaya stops it all.
That's insane. That's totally crazy. Well, listen, Sanjay, I think we've got to kind of wrap things up here. and I could talk to you forever. I want to have you back on for a second chat to just go over some more of these incredible adventures. And I want to thank you so much for joining us. And we can arrange all of these incredible expeditions for us. If you want to talk to Sanjay, you want to talk to me about planning all this, we're going to put the contact details below. And do you have any parting comments for the guests? Anything else? We're kind of in difficult times here, so I'm hoping that these incredible stories inspire future exploration.
All of the Himalaya basically naturally lends itself to social distancing.
Right.
So I mean,
it's Tibet. I mean, come on.
We've been doing that for the last 40 years. But no, in all seriousness, it is one of, I personally feel, and I'm biased for sure, one of the most beautiful places on the world. When I go to vacation, Tibet is where I would go.
Seriously, me too. I mean, a beach is a beach is a beach. I can't sit on a beach and relax, do nothing come on. That's just so anti-me. But we were first talking and you knew the restaurant I was talking about. I remember sitting in a cafe in Lhasa on the second story and just overlooking one of the squares and just looking at stuff that's on the menu, seeing the Tibetan writing on the window and just seeing all these different people, Chinese travelers, Indian travelers, and Tibetan travelers. And I was just like, this is the furthest away from home that I've ever been. And I love it.
Great. We'll definitely have to get you back there, Justin.
Hell yes, man. Hell yes. So like I said, if you're interested in planning a Tibetan excursion, please, contact us below. We'd love to hear from you. Again, Sanjay, thank you from the bottom of my heart, man. I appreciate everything. This has been great.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
All right. Take care. Have a great day.
Yeah. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Smart Aspirations. Justin Huff is the manager of Swaggy Swan Travel. For all travel-related inquiries, please visit www.swaggyswan.com. That's www.swaggyswan.com. And click inquiries. Have a stupendous day, and we'll see you next week.